I'm Lori Cooper, recently retired from the U.S. federal government, doing international trade policy, commercial diplomacy, and working with U.S. European trade policy. I hear this phrase used a lot recently. I understood the assignment, and looking back on my own life, I realized that being born in the late 50s, growing up in the 60s, there were specific assignments that young Black people had. And I understood the assignment from my parents, my grandparents, the people around me, that I needed to go to school, I needed to study hard, I needed to get good grades, I needed to go to college, and then get a good job. And that's kind of what framed the first part of my life, is focusing on that assignment. I was born at Queen of Angels Hospital in Los Angeles, California. I'm the eldest of the two siblings. I have a younger sister, but I feel the presence of a number of other siblings because my mom tried for many years to have children. I might have been the fourth or the fifth. It's just an interesting piece that's in the back of my head always. These other siblings that I had, or almost had. Being the eldest carried a lot of responsibility, a lot of expectation. My younger sister had freedom that I didn't have. That played a lot into the family dynamic. I was the one who followed the rules. She was the one who broke the rules. Just interesting in that way. My mom was born in Atlantic City, New Jersey. She had a number of siblings, and there was an epidemic. Everybody died. Her mom died. The siblings died. And it was just my mom and her brother. Her dad couldn't take care of them, so my mom was sent to Virginia to live with relatives. She went through school in Virginia, then she moved to Baltimore. That's where she met my dad. My dad was born and raised in Baltimore. And they had at least one relative who had moved out to California. So in the early 50s, my mom and dad drove to California. And that's where they decided to stay, in Los Angeles. In my younger years, I was in school, in an all-Black school in the Crenshaw area of Los Angeles, not far from Slauson and Crenshaw. That was through second grade. But in third grade, my parents, specifically my mother, heard about the fact that they were beginning a program to integrate the Los Angeles city schools. And it was a voluntary integration program. My mother signed up so that she drove me every morning to West Los Angeles and had to come back in the afternoon to pick me up. This was like an important part of the assignment that I think probably my mother understood also, that in order to get the same education as the white students were receiving, that the best chance of that was to be sitting in school with them. So from third grade on, I went from the Crenshaw area of Los Angeles out to West Los Angeles and went to primarily white schools, or predominantly white schools. This was an important time in the whole process of integration. I would say in Los Angeles, it wasn't as dramatic, especially in the South, where sometimes they had to have the National Guard come in to protect the students. It was still a bit of a traumatic experience going from, a school where everyone looked like me to a school where I was the only Black child in class for third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. So, it was quite an adventure. So going from elementary school into junior high school, the interesting change there is that they started mandatory busing. So by the time I got to junior high school, there were a larger number of African American and some Latino students who were in the school in West Los Angeles. So we had more of a support group, I would say, by the time I got to junior high school. and definitely in high school. By the time I got to high school, we had a much more diverse student body due to the mandatory busing, and integration had just become part of the fabric of the city schools by that time. So looking back at the impact all of this had on me, what I can recall most is wanting more than anything to have blonde hair and blue eyes. 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. I just didn't want to look different from all the other kids. The other thing I remember is being asked questions about my hair, or why were my gums dark? You know, when I smiled, the kids would look, their gums were pink, mine brown. So it's kind of awkward because you don't understand at that age why it's different. Nobody ever asked me those questions before. So that was the kind of impact when I was very young. It started to change as I got into junior high, high school, and beyond. It probably starting in junior high and high school, the desire for blonde hair, blue eyes faded because that was in the midst of the whole Black Power movement and just beginning to appreciate who we are as African Americans and having a bigger group of students around me who looked like me in junior high and high school. By high school, we had a Black Student Union, and this was 1968 to 71. There was just a lot going on. Throughout the 60s, we had presidents had been assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated, Martin Luther King, and there were riots and civil rights marches. And it was just a time of a lot of change, but I think it was also a time where, as Black people, we were all becoming more aware of our own value and beauty. So, yeah, definitely things changed over the course of junior high, high school. Interestingly, for most of my life, I had been interested in international things. I had a friend when I was really young who was Japanese, and her parents would speak to her in Japanese when I was at her home sometimes. So I became aware of other languages. I had another friend who lived just a block away who was Mexican American, and his mom was from Mexico and would speak to him in Spanish. So I became interested in languages and in all things international, probably even before I got to junior high. But by high school, when I had to pick a foreign language to study, I decided instead of Spanish to study French. And part of that was because all things international to government, the two languages are either English or French. So for the United Nations, for example. And I had it in my mind that I wanted to work with one of the international organizations or do some kind of international work for the U.S. government, even as far back as when I was in high school. So that's why I decided to study French. The French language in particular interested me because it's just beautiful. I think that was one of the things I liked about it. French culture I didn't learn about as much until college. And my 3rd year in college, I was able to study abroad, and I studied at the University of Paris and really immersed myself in all things French. Came to appreciate the language even more. The other thing that I really enjoyed about the French language, which, positive and negative to it, but a lot of the former colonies of France that are in Africa, there was just a lot of wonderful, political thought. There was a lot of wonderful art coming out of some of these countries in French. That was also really fascinating to me. Sitting in class in a lecture hall with 100 first-year French students. I was already a junior, but still my French wasn't at their level because I was coming from the United States. But sitting there studying in French or listening to the lecture in French, taking notes in French, and then having the exams in French was daunting. But after 1 or 2 months, you get to the point where you stop translating. I think the biggest issue is when you're taking the information in French, translating to English, and then trying to write it back in French. Once you get to the point where you can take it in French and then write it in French or speak it in French, then it becomes easy. That probably took a couple of months. And I even got to the point where I was dreaming in French at some point. So then the language has really started to sink in when you actually wake up and you realize you had a dream and the whole dream was in French. My French is rusty right now. I understand it well, but if I went back to Paris or some French-speaking place and lived there for a month, it would all come back. I think anything you learn when you're young sticks with you. It wouldn't take me long to regain the fluency. Well, just to clarify a little bit, when I was in college at Stanford, I decided to pursue international relations and French as a double major. And I had this strong interest in what was going on in Southern Africa, the freedom struggles, also in the United States and in the Caribbean. I don't know, somehow this became part of my focus and my DNA growing up. I think it was growing up in a household where my dad read the paper every day. We always had the LA Times, and we had the news on every night, and there was always a discussion of what was going on in the country and in the world. And I think somehow, way back when I was a kid, I just knew I wanted to be part of some of the solutions in the problems that are going on in the world and in the country. I think I also remember from reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and that book being a strong influence in me in terms of wanting to go to law school. So here I am at Stanford. I've done international relations, I've done French, a double major, and I thought about going on to do some kind of a master's in international or something. But back then, there was a lot of, I'm not even going to say pressure, but most of the people I was going through school with were going to go to law school or to medical school. And I just decided that law school was going to be a better approach for me. Ended up going to Harvard for law school. The interesting thing about the choices that I had there was I did do some study of international law, but I also did a whole year working on a program basically that dealt with legal services for the poor. And so I was in a program called Legal Services Institute my entire third year. It was a way of giving something back to society. I would say those things were what made the law school experience positive for me, international relations and the Legal Services Institute. To give a little bit of a background, so when I graduated from law school, I had gotten married the year before I graduated. And when I marched and got my degree and diploma, I was pregnant with my first son. So I took off 5 years from between law school and starting work and stayed home with my first son, and then I had a second son. There was a bit of a delay, I would say, going into the workforce, but I did have in mind that I wanted to do something in the field of international. And so when I came back into work after that 5-year hiatus where I stayed home with my kids, I looked for jobs specifically in U.S. government doing international work. And the job I found and I landed was in the U.S. Department of Commerce doing international trade, which eventually became a job doing specifically international trade between the U.S. and the European Union. That was the most of my career that I worked on U.S.-EU trade policy. Taking the 5 years off to focus on being a mom and raising my kids, definitely I altered my career trajectory. Most of my friends who went into graduate school around the time that I did, they quickly moved up the ladder in those beginning years, and I started later. But I will say for me, the 5 years that I was an at-home mom really benefited me, but I also felt that it benefited my children because they had the benefit of all of my education experience during that time, raising them through those early years. I wouldn't do it any other way, although it did slow my career trajectory. As far as the choice I made to take that time off from work and dedicate it to being at home with my sons, I wouldn't do it any differently. What I realize in hindsight is that the time goes by quickly, and it's important to make money. It's important to have a title and to contribute to the world. But there's nothing that compares to building a family, the long-term impact of family. My sons are now in their 40s, and we're very close. And one of the things I'm very committed to is learning how to work together more as we get older, finding how we support each other. It's not like, okay, the kids are 18, then you send them off, and that's the end of that, which was pretty much how it was with my parents' generation. But now I think families, and I think especially Black families, have to work together so that we strengthen each other throughout life. And as the family is the main unit, then the strength we can build in our families will continue out into the community and strengthen the community as a whole. So I wouldn't go back and change anything because it really built a strong foundation, I think, for my relationship with my sons, for our family, and also for their beginning stages of life. One of the most interesting periods for me in my career was being at the U.S. Department of Commerce when Ron Brown was appointed to be the Secretary of Commerce. I don't think we had ever a major cabinet post being held by an African American. And for me to be working there at that time, it was historic. When Ron Brown came in, he was concerned about there being representation of Black and other minorities in the higher levels of the Commerce Department. And he really made a push to seek for greater diversity, or to seek greater diversity in the management levels. So it really helped my career because I was one of the people who was able to obtain a promotion during that time period. The other thing that was really fascinating was to see how he managed his meetings with the foreign officials who came in to meet with him. He was so poised, so powerful in how he interacted. I think it was the German chancellor who came in, or the German foreign minister who came in. And it was just such a boost to see this kind of interaction. And I don't think anybody expected, as the meeting started, the command that he had over the entire room. It was just a very special time to be part of the Department of Commerce at that time. The fact that Ron Brown coming into the Department of Commerce and me being able to actually be in meetings with him was, for me as a younger person at that time, felt like such an opportunity, and that it was going to open more opportunities for me as I went along in my career. So the heartbreak that I felt was even compounded beyond the heartbreak that I would have felt, or that others felt, when we lost so many of our colleagues when the plane crashed. I knew a lot of the Commerce Department people who were on that plane. So it was such a loss on just in general, but also to lose a person that had stepped into a position and was representing African Americans at a level where we hadn't been represented before. It felt like a very crushing blow. And for my own career, it felt like a huge loss. I really think it made a long-term difference in my own career. The 1990s, mid-90s onward were difficult, starting with the plane crash that killed Ron Brown and all of the many colleagues that I had and business people that were on that plane. Not long after that, my godfather, who I was very close to, committed suicide. Totally unrelated to the plane crash, of course, but we had no idea that he was in a bad space. And then shortly after that, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer, and he started treatment. And I had been having debilitating headaches for a couple of years, soon after the plane crash that killed Ron Brown. The doctors attributed it to stress because I had been promoted to office director. I had a team of people that I was leading, a whole office. So I just took painkillers for a couple of years. And my dad came to visit, and he noticed that we were going to one of my kids' soccer games, and he and I were walking from the car toward where the game was located. And I thought I was walking straight, but I was walking on an angle, so he kept kind of grabbing my arm and pulling me back over. And he said, "You have to go get an MRI or something. Something's wrong," because literally my mind thought my body was walking in a straight line, but I wasn't. So after taking painkillers every 3 or 4 hours over the counter, and my dad being concerned, I finally went for an MRI. And immediately they came back and they said, "Oh, you have a tumor or some kind of mass in your head." That was in 1998. I had to have surgery within the next 4 weeks or 3 weeks. And the first surgery, they didn't get it all. I had symptoms that started back up. The headache started again within a few weeks of having the first surgery. I had to have a second surgery in November of that same year. So in July of that year, literally, they opened my whole skull and went and did a surgery, stitched me back up. And then in November that same year, they did the same thing again. Traumatic, frightening. And in those days, sounds like ancient history, but we didn't have the internet like we do today. It was hard to find information, to research things on your own. And I did as much as I could, but came out of those couple surgeries with having to make some serious choices. I had maybe 3 different opinions on what type of tumor it was. Maybe it was an aggressive tumor, maybe it was a mid-range tumor, or maybe it was a tumor that would be slow growing. I got a bunch of additional opinions and decided to work with a doctor that they had referred me to in Washington, D.C., who is actually the head of Children's Hospital, because the type of tumor that I had, or still have, it's called a juvenile pilocytic astrocytoma. It's usually found in children. After getting a lot of opinions, it seemed like the majority of the opinions were leaning toward it being a juvenile pilocytic astrocytoma. I ended up coming back to D.C. I worked with the doctor who was at Children's Hospital, who's a specialist in this type of tumor, Dr. Packer. We had some long meetings, long discussions, and I asked him, would he be willing to work with me to watch and see if it would calm down and not grow anymore. And he said it wouldn't be his first choice, but if that's what I wanted to try, he would monitor me every 3 months. So for several years, I had scans, MRIs, every 3 months and met regularly with Dr. Packer. And in fact, the remaining tumor that's in there, it just didn't grow anymore. And I think what happened is, so back up a little bit, the first surgery was done at Georgetown, and probably not enough was taken out. Where the tumor is located, it's close to, I'm going to call it the motor strip. I may be saying the wrong thing, but wherever it's located, they couldn't cut but so far. Otherwise, I'd have been paralyzed on one side. So I had to go back for a second surgery because the first one didn't cut enough. I ended up going out to Los Angeles to Dr. Keith Black for that second surgery. African-American neurosurgeon, top in the world, or one of the top in the world. And I think he's the reason I'm still here today, or he's one of the reasons, because he did an aggressive surgery, but he also said that he wasn't going to risk the paralysis side of things. So he took as much as he could. And what happened was, I think he took enough out that the rest has been stable ever since. Thanks also to Dr. Packer, who was willing to go with the wait and watch. And then thanks also to, I did a lot of complementary and alternative therapies. I did Chinese medicine, herbal medicine, I did acupuncture, I did visualization, a lot of different things that weren't really well known back in the late 90s or weren't commonplace like they are now. So, yeah, I'm still here all these years later, and whatever's in there has just decided to calm down. I remember complaining to my father when I was probably in college or in law school, just randomly complaining about something. And he said to me, "Lori, no one ever promised you a rose garden. Like, what are you complaining about?" And later on, I was able to reflect. Here's a man who was born in the 1920s, 1921, who had been through the Depression and been through world wars and been through the worst of Jim Crow and everything. So I had brain surgery just after my dad had been undergoing treatment for lung cancer. And when I came out of the brain surgeries, both of them, I think in some ways, maybe it gave my dad permission to let go because he was so worried. I think he was hanging on to make sure I was okay. So after I had those two surgeries in 98, my dad died in 99. This was a big time because I was also getting my sons through high school and off to college. And then my mom died in 2000. So this was between 96 and between the time when Ron Brown's plane crashed in 2000 or 2001. It was just one thing after another. But I think what happens is you start to understand that this is life. There are periods of good times. Then there can come periods when they're just storms and difficult times. But you get through it. One thing my dad also told me in his last few months was, nobody's going to live forever. That's the harsh reality that we all have to deal with. We don't know if we're going to go in a plane crash. Some people decide to exit on their own via suicide, like my godfather did. And sometimes it's illness. So in some ways, I developed a perspective. It took a long time after that 5-year period or 4-year period for me to really kind of get through a grieving process. But you start to just accept that this is life. All of these things are part of what makes up this crazy and wonderful thing that we call life, all the ups and downs, the good and bad. Music has always been a part of my life in the sense that growing up as a kid, Motown and Jackson 5, and then later Stevie Wonder and, Earth, Wind and Fire, all of these just magical groups and amazing talents. That was kind of the language of music that my friend group was really immersed in, Marvin Gaye. But I also grew up listening to my mother playing records. Sam Cooke, Nancy Wilson, Dionne Warwick, Sammy Davis. There was always some music playing in the house. And I think what happened as I got older, I kind of returned to that love of music. And especially, I think, after all of these challenges, I had heard about a jazz workshop that was run by Ronnie Wells and Ron Elliston in the D.C. area, where you could join and learn about performing jazz. And then they did, at the one step down was a jazz club in D.C., where they would have every, I think it was 4 months or 6 months, they'd have an opportunity for their students to come in and perform. I had gone to one of those performances, maybe in 1992 or 1993, because I knew someone at the Commerce Department who was in that workshop. It took me a full 10 years later. It wasn't until 2002, 2003, where I was able to join the workshop and started to love music more from the side of delving in, learning music, learning jazz, and also learning the performance aspects. I've studied jazz since 2002, all the way up until now. I take classes now. I still am involved in workshops. I'm not a performer at this time, but I really do believe that studying music has helped with healing my brain and healing my spirit, just the emotional recovery from everything that happened during a really difficult time in my life. My children, I say to them that they're the best thing that ever happened to me. And then my granddaughter asked me, "What about me?" And I said, "Well, yeah, you too." But really, there's been no greater joy than raising my two sons. They kind of received the gift of my interest in international, all things international and in languages, because we enrolled them in a bilingual Spanish-English preschool, Spanish-English elementary school, and then they continued with their studies of Spanish on into junior high school. And then both have had opportunities to travel overseas. So that's been one thing I've really enjoyed, is sharing that gift with them. One surprisingly followed in his mom and dad's footsteps and became a lawyer. I was very happy that he attended Howard Law School, where some of the greatest African-American lawyers have been educated. My youngest son followed his passions and played pro soccer for 10 years here in the United States, and now runs a nonprofit to help Black and brown kids have opportunities to play high-level travel soccer, so they can play without having to pay the exorbitant fees that often, kids face who want to play. And then these kids, by being able to play high-level soccer, maybe they wouldn't normally be able to afford it, but this nonprofit Open Goal project enables them to play for free. Some of them have gotten college scholarships that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten. Even just opportunities to be seen by coaches, to get invited to play at higher levels. I would say proud in many ways, but also just happy for them that they found things that they enjoy doing in life. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how they take what they've done so far and build forward in their lives. So I have now 2 granddaughters. It's, once again, just the greatest joy of my life, having the children. One thing I will say is, as I look at my children, who are now not children, they're adults, but when I look at my offspring, it just reminds me of how short life is and how you have to enjoy every moment. It all goes by really quickly. And it brings me back to this feeling about family being the most important thing. There are things I can do in my life, but now I have poured into 2 wonderful human beings who, after I'm gone, will continue doing things in the world that will be, I'm sure, helpful for the world. And now I have, beyond them, grandchildren who will continue doing things in the world. So it's just an incredible feeling of being a part of a process. It's life. I'm sure my parents felt this way, and their parents. Can only say it's one of the greatest things in the world. There's a lot of things I've done that I'm extremely happy about and proud of, but I would say the greatest joy comes from my children and family. After 38 years in the workforce, retirement is still pretty new. I think it took me a full month to just feel semi-rested. I was exhausted. Now it's the excitement of looking ahead. What do I want to do? I've been a mom. I've been an employee. And now it's kind of seeing everything open up again for me to decide, what do I want to do with these coming years? I'll throw in that the past few years during the pandemic, the thing that was the most helpful and the most exciting was to find so many online opportunities to join community. One of the things that has been great about this is the communities are intergenerational. It's not just me talking with my friends who grew up in the same era. It's about connecting with people who maybe in their 30s, maybe in their 40s, maybe in their 50s, some in their 60s and 70s. who often or in these communities have a similar mindset and who are on a similar path. And I'll give a couple examples. One, the Exodus Summit community is a community of Black women who have a similar goal of either taking extended sabbaticals overseas or moving overseas, something I'm also interested in. The two young women of Exodus Summit, Rashida Dow and Stephanie Perry, were very instrumental during the pandemic in me beginning to see the opportunities for moving overseas, Portugal, Panama, Mexico. There really are wonderful opportunities to have lower cost of living and greater opportunities. Another good example, there's the community that's known as the FIRE community, Financial Independence, Retire Early. This is not new. It's just that during the pandemic, people became more aware of it. And there's one group called Our Rich Journey. It's a couple that has started a YouTube channel to encourage other people to get their finances to a state where you don't have to work till you're 65 or 70, where it's not as hard as it used to be if you learn how to invest to retire in your 40s or retire in your 50s. This is exciting to me. Another one I will mention, and this is a really big piece of my journey, has been Arlan Hamilton. I stumbled on Arlan's YouTube and Arlan's All Access, like the first iteration she did. For me, I mean, these things have been life-changing. I just have to say they've been life-changing. To get in these communities, to begin to learn from other people, to share and to receive support. It's not like being in a job where you're just getting assignments, doing these assignments. Here, everybody's trying to expand their mind, expand their horizon, do new things, do different things, contribute in different ways. I don't think I have enough time in one lifetime to even do all the things I want to do at this point. I'm interested in entrepreneurship. I'm interested in having an online presence, a YouTube channel. Again, it's just exciting at this point, retire. In some ways I feel tired because I could just go lay on a beach or I could just go on cruises or something. But instead, I'm challenging myself by, taking classes that Arlan's offering or by being in the Exodus Summit community, doing these programs for financial independence. Even though I'm retired, I'm on Social Security, I'm on a pension, and there's some people in government who want to cut Social Security, who want to cut the pensions. So to really be working with people who are working on strengthening their financial independence, it's another really good process for me, even at this stage of my life. Some advice. The best thing, I think, is to be yourself. Be authentic. There's so many opportunities now in the world. You don't have to just go get a job. You can create a business. There's so many things in the creative art. Don't do what society says you have to do. Do what makes you happy. Do it in a way that's responsible so that you can support yourself. But factor in what makes you happy. Don't just go out there and chase money. Find what makes you happy and find a way to make that support you. Summing up my journey, I think it's stepping out on faith. Whether it was believing I could get through those school experiences in my early years or applying to Stanford and going there at a time when there weren't many Black students going to Stanford, and the same for applying to Harvard Law School. Not always the easiest experiences for me, but stepping out on faith that if I could dream it, I could do it. Same with my children. Decided to send them to DC public schools, whereas a lot of our peers sent their kids to private schools, but on faith that this was the best place for them to get an education that would serve them as members of the community of the city that we lived in, and also helping them to have those experiences internationally so that they could feel themselves as citizens of the world, stepping out on faith that that would be okay for them to go to DC public schools. And then stepping out on faith that I could operate in the Commerce Department in a unit that focused on U.S.-Europe trade as the only, or one of just a couple non-white and only a couple African Americans in that unit. So step out on faith, yeah, I would say that's the biggest thing. It got me through brain tumor, got me through all kinds of things. I don't think a lot of people expected me to still be here after I had the brain tumor and a couple of surgeries. And I kind of directed my healing journey. I took a chance. They were telling me, do all this chemo, do all this radiation, but I did enough research to know that for the type of tumor I had, those might not be the best thing to do. I had support from doctors to monitor me, but I survived because I had faith in myself, I think. And that's, I think, that I'm still here after all the challenges. So I'll say this, my legacy up until now, I would say, of course, family, is part of my legacy. The time I was in government, I was able to launch some programs, and this is specifically it started under the Obama administration. I was able to launch a program between the U.S. and the European Union that is still running now. So it started in 2008, 2010, and it's still running. It was a program for cooperation between the U.S. and the European Union to support small and medium-sized enterprises operating in the transatlantic market. Career-wise, that's probably part of my legacy. But for kind of what I want to be remembered for long-term, it could be that I'm building that now as I move into this next phase post the working world. But when I say working world, it's really after being an employee, as I move out into things that I'm going to be doing on my own. So to be determined.